He stood in her driveway in a bespoke suit, clutching a proposition like a hostile takeover. "My father said you needed a husband," the billionaire stated, pulling out a contract. What this exhausted single mom said next didn't just reject his millions. It brought a titan to his knees. Nora's hands were stained with the kind of dirt that soap couldn't touch. It lived in the microscopic ridges of her fingerprints, a permanent testament to the 50 hours a week she spent pulling life out of the ground. She was 32, running on 4 hours of sleep, and calculating the exact cost of a pediatric asthma inhaler while repotting a rare ghost orchid. The air inside the sprawling glass greenhouse was thick and humid, clinging to her skin like a wet wool blanket. She wiped a stray strand of dark hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a smudge of potting soil across her brow. "You look like you've been entirely submerged in a bog, Nora." The voice was gravelly, scraped raw by 80 years of cigars and giving orders. Nora didn't flinch. She simply patted the dark soil around the base of the orchid and turned to face Edward Kensington. Edward was a man who owned half the skyline of the city, yet he spent his Tuesday mornings in a drafty antique wheelchair at the edge of his estate's greenhouse, watching his head horticulturist work. He wore a tweed jacket that smelled of old library books. His eyes, however, were sharp as shattered glass. "Good morning to you too, Mr. Kensington," Nora said, her voice flat but not unkind. "And it's peat moss, not a bog. Though if I had to choose between the bog and reviewing the new fertilizer budget, I'd take the bog." Edward chuckled, the sound devolving into a dry cough. He tapped his cane against the metal leg of his chair. "You work too hard. It's unseemly for a woman of your obvious intellect to be doing manual labor until her hands bleed." "My hands aren't bleeding," Nora said, holding them up. "They're just calloused. And manual labor pays for Toby's first-grade tuition. Intellectual labor, in my experience, just leaves you with a lot of opinions and unpaid electric bills." Edward watched her. He had a habit of staring at people until they squirmed, a tactic that had served him well in boardrooms for 5 decades. Nora never squirmed. She just went back to her orchids. She was practical to a fault. When her ex left her 4 years ago, citing the overwhelming pressure of a sick toddler, Nora hadn't cried. Not where anyone could see anyway. She had simply packed his bags, changed the locks, and taken a second job. Cynicism wasn't a choice for her. It was a survival mechanism. "How is the boy?" Edward asked, the edge leaving his voice. "Toby is good. He drew a picture of a dinosaur eating a skyscraper yesterday. I think he's developing a healthy distrust of corporate infrastructure." Edward laughed again. "Smart boy. You need help, Nora." Nora's hands stilled. She looked at the old man, her guard instantly rising. "I don't need charity, Mr. Kensington. We've talked about this. I do the work, you pay my salary. That's the arrangement." "I didn't say charity," Edward muttered, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "I said help. You carry the world on your shoulders. It's a heavy rock, Nora. Even Atlas needed to shrug eventually." "Atlas was a myth," Nora replied, picking up her trowel. "I have a mortgage." She dismissed the conversation, but as Edward rolled himself out of the greenhouse, his sharp eyes lingered on the worn-out soles of her work boots. He saw the way she favored her left leg, a silent echo of carrying a heavy 6-year-old up 3 flights of stairs when the apartment elevator broke down. Nora didn't know it, but Edward Kensington was a man who despised an unsolved equation. And to him, Nora was a brilliant, struggling equation that simply needed the right variable introduced. Later that evening, Nora sat at her cramped kitchen table. The silence of the apartment was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic wheezing of Toby's breathing machine in the next room. She had a stack of envelopes in front of her. Red lettering. Final notice. Past due. She opened her banking app. The numbers on the screen were violently small. She transferred $40 from savings to checking. It felt like moving deck chairs on the Titanic. She rested her forehead against the cool faux wood surface of the table. She wasn't sad. She was utterly, hollowly exhausted. She didn't want a knight in shining armor. She just wanted a break. A single month where she didn't have to decide between buying groceries and paying the heating bill. She closed her eyes and listened to the machine pump air into her son's lungs. Keep going, she told herself. Just keep digging. Leo Kensington did not like messes. He sat at the head of a 20-foot mahogany conference table on the 45th floor of Kensington Holdings. The room was glass, steel, and muted gray. The men and women sitting around the table wore suits that cost more than most people made in a year. Leo wore a charcoal bespoke suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression entirely unreadable. He was 36, and he operated with the ruthless efficiency of a machine algorithm. The acquisition of Vance. The CFO started, then caught himself. Excuse me. The acquisition of the Apex tech firm is complete. We absorbed their assets, liquidated the redundant departments, and the stock is up 3% on the news. 3% is a temporary bump based on market noise, Leo said. His voice was low, devoid of inflection. I want to see the Q3 projections with their proprietary software integrated into our logistics network. If it doesn't push our efficiency up by at least 8%, we bought a lemon. Liquidating the staff doesn't mean anything if the product is defective. The room went silent. Leo didn't lead with inspiration. He led with cold, unyielding gravity. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. Have the numbers on my desk by tomorrow morning. We're done here. He walked back to his corner office. The view of the city was panoramic, a sprawling grid of lights and concrete. It was an empire, and he was its reigning king. Yet, as he looked out over the glass, he felt nothing. No triumph, no joy. Just the quiet hum of the climate control. His life was a series of transactions. Mergers, acquisitions, hostile takeovers. Even his romantic life had been transactional. Two brief, highly publicized relationships with women of equal social standing that ended when they realized Leo's chest contained a ledger where a heart should be. You look like a gargoyle up here, Leo. Leo turned. His father, Edward, was standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane. Dad, you should have told my assistant you were coming. I would have made time. I don't make appointments to see my own son. Edward grunted, limping into the room and collapsing into one of the Italian leather guest chairs. He looked around the sterile office with open distaste. This room looks like a morgue for expensive furniture. Leo sighed, pouring a glass of sparkling water and handing it to his father. Did you come up here to critique my interior decorator, or is there a board issue? Neither. Edward took a sip of the water and grimaced. I came to talk to you about your life. Or rather, your complete lack of one. Leo sat behind his desk, steepling his fingers. I'm running a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. That takes time. It takes time, yes. But it shouldn't take your humanity, Edward shot back. The board is breathing down my neck, Leo. They want stability. They want the family man image. The stock dips every time you're photographed leaving a gala alone, looking like you want to murder the paparazzi. You need a wife. You need an heir. You need to look like a human being, not a corporate android. Leo rubbed his temples. We've had this conversation. I don't have the time or the inclination to date. Women in our circle want a lifestyle, a show pony. I refuse to play the game. Then don't play the game, Edward said softly. He leaned forward, resting his gnarled hands on the handle of his cane. Make a deal. Leo paused. A deal? I have someone in mind, Edward continued. She's not from our world. She's practical, grounded, fiercely intelligent, completely unpretentious, and currently drowning in financial responsibility. She has a young son. She doesn't want romance any more than you do. She needs stability. You need a wife. Leo stared at his father. You want me to arrange a marriage? What century are we in? The century where practicality wins, Edward countered. Her name is Nora Hastings. She runs the horticulture team at my estate. I've watched her for 3 years. She is tough as nails, Leo. She won't care about your money, but she needs it to keep her boy healthy and safe. It's mutually beneficial. A contract. Leo opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Within seconds, his security team's background check software was pulling up records. Nora Hastings, 32. Debt, significant. Medical bills, student loans, single mother, no criminal record. He looked at her driver's license photo on the screen. She looked tired. Her eyes were dark, devoid of the artificial sparkle the women in his social circles possessed. She looked real. She works for you, Leo said. Isn't that a conflict of interest? I'm stepping out of it, Edward said, standing up. I've laid the groundwork. I told you, she needs a husband. She needs a partner to shoulder the financial burden. You need a wife to secure your image and the board's confidence. Pitch it to her like a merger. You're good at those. Edward walked to the door, pausing before he left. But tread lightly, Leo. She's not one of your distressed assets. She has pride. When the door clicked shut, Leo looked back at the screen. A single mother drowning in debt. A straightforward problem with a financial solution. He didn't see a woman. He saw a deficit that he had the capital to erase. He drafted an email to his legal team. Subject: prenuptial agreement and contract of marriage. Need a draft by tonight. Generous financial terms, full medical coverage for a minor dependent, strict privacy clauses. It was just business. It was pouring rain on a Thursday afternoon when Leo's sleek black town car pulled into the gravel driveway of Nora's modest rental house. The neighborhood was tired. Faded siding, chain-link fences, and overgrown lawns. Leo stepped out of the car, his driver immediately holding a massive black umbrella over his head. Leo waved the driver back. Stay in the car. He walked up the cracked concrete path, his handmade Italian leather shoes immediately sinking into a puddle of muddy water. He didn't care. In his breast pocket rested a folded 20-page contract printed on heavy stock paper. It guaranteed Nora Hastings $2 million in a private account, full tuition for her son through college, and comprehensive medical coverage. In exchange, she would sign a marriage license, move into his penthouse, attend 12 public functions a year, and ask no questions about his personal schedule. It was foolproof. He knocked on the peeling green paint of the front door. A moment later, it opened. Nora stood there. She was wearing a faded gray sweatshirt and sweatpants. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot, and she held a damp dish towel in her hands. She looked from Leo's immaculate suit down to his ruined shoes, and then up to his face. "Are you lost?" she asked. Her voice was slightly raspy, completely unimpressed. "Nora Hastings?" Leo asked. "Yes, who are you?" "My name is Leo Kensington. Edward Kensington is my father." Nora's posture shifted slightly. She didn't open the door wider, but her eyes sharpened. "Is he all right? Did something happen to him?" "My father's fine," Leo said. The rain was blowing under the small porch awning, misting his suit jacket. "May I come in?" Nora hesitated. She looked back over her shoulder into the house. "Toby is watching a movie. Keep your voice down. Wipe your shoes." She stepped aside. Leo walked into the small living room. It smelled of cheap vanilla candles and rubbing alcohol. The furniture was second-hand, a mix of mismatched patterns. Toys were neatly stacked in the corner. In the adjacent room, he could hear the muffled sounds of a cartoon and the hiss of an air purifier. "What does Edward's son want with me?" Nora asked, crossing her arms. She didn't offer him a seat. Leo stood in the center of the room, feeling uncharacteristically large in the cramped space. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the thick envelope, holding it out to her. "I'm here to offer you a proposition," Leo said, his voice dropping into the same cadence he used in the boardroom. Flat, authoritative, logical. "My father speaks very highly of you. He also made me aware of your financial constraints." Nora didn't take the envelope. Her eyes dropped to it, then back to his face. "My financial constraints are none of your business, or your father's. They become my business when they present an opportunity for mutual benefit," Leo pressed on, ignoring her rising defense. He wasn't used to people rejecting the envelope before they even opened it. "My father said you needed a husband. Frankly, I need a wife. The board of directors at my company requires me to project a stable, family-oriented image. I have no interest in the theatrics of modern dating. I want a partnership based on clear contractual obligations." Nora just stared at him. The silence stretched. The cartoon music in the next room tinkled cheerfully. Leo felt a rare flicker of awkwardness, so he filled the silence with data. "Inside this envelope is a contract. It outlines a marriage of convenience. If you agree, your son's medical bills will be permanently covered by top-tier private insurance. His education will be funded in full. I will deposit $2 million into an account solely in your name upon signing. In return, you act as my wife at required public functions, and we maintain a harmonious, separate domestic life." He waited for the shock. He waited for the tears of relief, the disbelief, the sudden softening of her posture as she realized her crushing burdens had just been lifted by a billionaire savior. Instead, Nora slowly wiped her damp hands on the dish towel. She walked over to the small kitchen counter, set the towel down, and turned back to face him. "Let me get this straight," Nora said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "You did a background check on me." "It was standard procedure," Leo defended smoothly. "You looked at my debt. You looked at my son's medical records. I assessed the variables. And you decided that because I am poor, I am for sale." The bluntness of the statement hit Leo like a physical blow. "That isn't what I said. This is a mutually beneficial—" "Stop talking." Nora took 3 steps toward him. She was a foot shorter than him, wearing sweatpants and smelling of damp soil and cheap soap. But in that moment she commanded the room with a terrifying gravity. "You look at my life and see a deficit," Nora said, her voice tight with a fierce, quiet rage. "You see the overdue bills and the second-hand sofa, and you think, there is a desperate woman. I can buy her. You think because I have less money, I have less dignity. Nora, the financial security? I don't care about your money," she cut him off, her eyes blazing. "I work 50 hours a week with my hands in the dirt to keep a roof over my son's head. I do it myself. It is hard and I am tired, but it is mine. I don't need a husband, Mr. Kensington. I don't need a savior in a $5,000 suit." She stepped closer, pointing a finger at his chest. "And I certainly don't need a dependent, because that's what you are. You walked in here trailing mud on my floor to hand me a piece of paper because you are too cowardly, too emotionally bankrupt to actually build a life with a human being. You want to buy a prop for your board meetings." Leo opened his mouth to speak, to counter her argument, to deploy logic. But his throat seized. "Your father was wrong," Nora whispered, stepping back. The anger in her eyes was replaced by a profound, heavy pity that made Leo's stomach drop. "I don't need a husband. You need a soul. Now take your contract and get out of my house." Leo stood frozen. He was the CEO of a global empire. He regularly dismantled hostile negotiators without raising his heart rate. But standing in this cramped, slightly damp living room, looking into the eyes of a woman who had just stared down $2 million and called him emotionally bankrupt, he had absolutely nothing to say. The silence deafened him. He looked at the envelope in his hand, suddenly acutely aware of how grotesque it was. He looked at Nora, whose jaw was set in granite. For the first time in his adult life, Leo Kensington was utterly, entirely speechless. The drive back to the city was agonizingly quiet. Leo sat in the back of the town car, watching the rain streak across the tinted glass. For the first time in 10 years, he wasn't checking his phone. The screen remained black, resting on the leather seat next to him, right beside the crumpled envelope. He felt physically altered. His chest was tight, his breathing shallow. Nora's words echoed in the confined space of the vehicle, bouncing off the plush upholstery. Emotionally bankrupt, a dependent. You want a prop? He had built an empire by predicting market fluctuations, mitigating risk, and out-negotiating men twice his age. He understood value. He understood leverage. But Nora Hastings had looked at $2 million, a sum that could fundamentally rewrite her existence, and batted it away like a nuisance. Because the cost was her autonomy. Because the cost was tying her life to a man who didn't know how to feel. He rested his head against the cool window. He had expected gratitude. He had expected relief. Instead, he had been held up to a mirror, and the reflection terrified him. Back in the faded rental house, the adrenaline was slowly draining out of Nora, leaving a cold, trembling exhaustion in its wake. She stood at the kitchen sink, gripping the edge of the Formica counter so hard her knuckles turned white. The dish towel lay abandoned on the floor. She stared out the window at the rain pooling in the cracked driveway where the town car had sat. $2 million. The number floated in her mind, a phantom lifeline. It would have paid off the medical debt by morning. It would have meant a house with a backyard, a car that didn't stall at red lights, a life where she didn't wake up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m, wondering how she was going to afford Toby's next pulmonologist appointment. A traitorous tear slipped down her cheek, hot and fast. She wiped it away furiously with the back of her hand. "Mom!" Nora turned. Toby was standing in the hallway, clutching a worn stuffed triceratops. His pajamas were slightly too short for his growing legs, and he looked sleepy, his dark hair sticking up in odd directions. "Hey, Bug," Nora said, her voice softening instantly. She walked over and knelt down, pulling him into a tight hug. He smelled like baby shampoo and sleep. "Movie over?" "Yeah, the good guys won." "Was someone at the door?" "Just a salesman," Nora whispered, burying her face in his shoulder. "Just someone selling something we don't need." "Okay," Toby mumbled, resting his chin on her head. "I'm hungry. Can we have macaroni?" "Macaroni it is," she said, standing up and forcing a smile. As she filled a pot with tap water, her hands finally stopped shaking. She had made the right choice. She would rather feed her son cheap pasta in a drafty kitchen with her head held high than serve him caviar in a sterile penthouse where his mother was nothing more than an acquired asset. She would survive. She always did. The following Monday, Leo bypassed his office entirely. He took the private elevator directly down to the underground parking garage, got into his own unassuming sedan, and drove to his father's estate. Edward was in the library, a massive room lined with first editions and smelling heavily of leather and old paper. He was reading a physical newspaper, a magnifying glass held loosely in his right hand. He didn't look up as Leo walked in. "I assume you're here to yell at me." Leo stopped in the center of the Persian rug. He wore his usual bespoke suit, but the tie was missing, and the top button of his shirt was undone. It was the most disheveled his father had seen him in a decade. "Why did you send me there, Dad?" Leo asked. His voice wasn't angry, it was hollow. You knew what she was going to say. You knew she wouldn't take the contract. Edward finally lowered the paper. His sharp eyes studied his son, tracing the exhaustion lining Leo's jaw. "I suspected she wouldn't take it," Edward corrected mildly. "Nora is a force of nature. You cannot purchase a hurricane, Leo. You can only stand in awe of it." "Then why?" Leo demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Why send me into that house with a piece of paper offering to buy her life? She looked at me like I was garbage. She told me I was completely bankrupt inside. And the worst part, Dad, the worst part is I couldn't even argue with her." Edward sighed, folding the newspaper carefully and setting it on the side table. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his folded hands. "I didn't send you there to save her, Leo," Edward said softly. "I sent you there to save you." Leo froze. "You've spent the last 10 years building a fortress of money and logic," Edward continued, his gravelly voice filled with a rare, heavy sadness. "You've insulated yourself from every human experience. You don't date, you don't mourn, you don't celebrate. You just acquire. I watched you becoming a machine. And I knew that if I just told you that, you'd ignore me. You needed to hit a wall you couldn't buy your way through. You needed to meet someone whose integrity was completely immune to your capital." Leo sank into one of the heavy armchairs, burying his face in his hands. The silence in the library was absolute, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "I don't know how to be anything else," Leo confessed to his palms. "I look at a problem, and I throw resources at it until it disappears. That's all I know how to do." "Then learn something new," Edward said, picking his paper back up. "Start by apologizing, not with a check, with your mouth." It was a Tuesday morning. The air inside the greenhouse was already climbing past 80 degrees, heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Nora was elbow deep in a massive planter, wrestling with the root ball of a stubborn fiddle leaf fig. She was sweating, her hair plastered to the back of her neck, her mind running a continuous, exhausting loop of budget recalculations. The heavy glass door of the greenhouse creaked open. Nora didn't look up. "If that's the new shipment of perlite, leave it by the door. I'll sign for it in a minute." "It's not perlite." Nora's hand stopped moving. The soil slipped from her fingers. She stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her canvas apron, her jaw setting into a hard line. Leo Kensington stood in the aisle, but the armor was gone. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a plain gray t-shirt, dark denim jeans, and a pair of work boots that looked brand new and entirely out of place. He looked uncertain, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "If you have another contract in your pocket, I'm going to bury it in this planter," Nora said, her voice dangerously calm. "And then I'm going to bury you." Leo offered a small, self-deprecating smile. "No contracts, no envelopes. I left my checkbook in the city." "Then why are you here?" Leo took a slow breath. He stepped closer, stopping a few feet away from her workspace. He looked at the dirt on her hands, the exhaustion in her eyes, the sheer undeniable reality of her. "I came to apologize," Leo said. His voice was steady, but it lacked the cold authority it had held in her living room. It was just a man speaking to a woman. "You were right about everything. I treated your life like a distressed asset. I was arrogant, I was insulting, and I was entirely out of line. I'm sorry." Nora stared at him. She was an expert at reading people, a skill born of necessity. She looked for the angle, the manipulation, the hidden clause in his apology. She found nothing. His eyes were open, unguarded, and deeply remorseful. She let out a long breath, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Okay, apology accepted. Now, if you'll excuse me, this fig tree is currently winning a wrestling match against me, and I need to get it repotted before noon." She turned back to the planner, expecting him to leave, to retreat back to his glass tower with a clear conscience. Instead, she heard the crunch of gravel as he stepped closer. "How do I help?" Leo asked. Nora glanced over her shoulder. "Excuse me? You said it's winning. How do I help?" Leo pulled his hands out of his pockets. "You're wearing a cashmere blend t-shirt," Nora pointed out dryly, "and you have absolutely no idea what you're doing." "You're right on both counts," Leo admitted, "but I'm capable of following instructions. Tell me what to do." Nora hesitated. She looked at the heavy root ball, then back at Leo. A tiny, cynical part of her wanted to watch him ruin his expensive clothes. "Grab the base of the trunk. When I tell you, lift straight up. Don't yank. Just steady pressure." Leo stepped up to the planter. He reached down, his hands wrapping around the rough bark of the fig tree. He didn't flinch when his knuckles grazed the wet, fertilizer-soaked soil. "On 3, Nora said, digging her trowel under the root mass. 1, 2, 3. Leo pulled. The tree resisted for a second, then gave way with a wet sucking sound, lifting free of the pot. Dirt showered down over his boots and the front of his shirt, leaving a dark, muddy smear across the gray fabric. He didn't look at the stain. He looked at Nora. "Where does it go?" "The blue ceramic pot on your left." They worked in silence for 20 minutes. Leo followed her brief, clipped commands perfectly. He fetched water. He carried bags of soil. He held plants steady while she pruned away dead roots. By the time they finished the row, he was sweating, his shirt was ruined, and his fingernails were caked in black dirt. Nora walked over to the small sink in the corner of the greenhouse and turned on the tap, washing her hands. She grabbed a rough paper towel and tossed the roll to Leo. "You ruined your shirt," she noted, leaning against the wooden counter. "It was just a shirt," Leo said, scrubbing at his hands. The abrasive paper towel felt strange against his skin, but the cold water was a relief. He looked down at his dirty hands and felt a bizarre, unfamiliar sensation blooming in his chest. Pride. Not the pride of a closed deal, but the simple, quiet pride of physical labor. "Why did you really come back, Leo?" Nora asked quietly. Leo threw the damp paper towel in the trash. He leaned against the counter next to her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Because I realized I don't know anything," he said, looking out over the rows of green leaves. "I know how to dismantle a corporation, but I don't know how to build anything real. I live in a glass box. You create life out of dirt. I want to know how to do that. I want to learn how to be in the world, not just own it." He looked at her, his expression entirely vulnerable. "I'm not asking for a wife, Nora. I'm not asking for a contract. I'm just asking if I can come back tomorrow and help you carry the soil." Nora studied his profile. The arrogance was completely stripped away, leaving a man who was quietly, desperately trying to find his footing in a world he had forgotten how to touch. She thought about her bills. She thought about the endless, exhausting grind of her solitary life. She didn't need a savior, but maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't mind a partner to help carry the heavy things. "I start at 6 a.m., Nora said, her voice soft but firm. "If you're late, you're on compost duty." A genuine smile broke across Leo's face, reaching all the way to his eyes. It made him look younger, softer. "I'll be here at 5:50. Over the next 3 months, the billionaire CEO of Kensington Holdings practically vanished from the social pages. He was still running his empire, still taking board meetings and closing deals. But his evenings and weekends were spent in the dirt. He learned the difference between nitrogen and phosphorus deficiencies. He'd learned how to graft fruit trees. And more importantly, he learned about Toby. He didn't try to buy the boy's affection. He didn't show up with expensive video games or new cars. Instead, one rainy Saturday, when Nora had to bring Toby to the greenhouse, Leo simply sat down on the gravel floor with the boy and spent 2 hours helping him build a structurally sound fortress out of empty terracotta pots. Nora watched them from across the room. She watched Leo patiently explain the concept of a load-bearing wall to a 6-year-old, his expensive jeans covered in clay dust. She watched Toby laugh, a full, unrestrained sound that made her chest ache with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Leo never offered her money again. But one afternoon, Nora received a letter from the estate's accounting department. Her salary had been tripled. When she marched into Edward's library to demand an explanation, the old man just smirked. "Don't look at me," Edward said, sipping his tea. Leo audited the estate's payroll. He presented a 30-page document proving that you were grossly underpaid based on market value, operational efficiency, and your impact on the property's overall valuation. He threatened to sue me on your behalf if I didn't adjust it. "I suggest you take the money, Nora." He's a very aggressive negotiator. Nora had walked out of the library, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. He hadn't given her charity. He had given her equity. He had recognized her value and forced the world to match it. That evening, Leo was waiting by her car in the driveway of the estate. He was holding 2 terrible, lukewarm coffees from the gas station down the road. Nora walked up to him. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She took one of the styrofoam cups from his hand. The air was cooling down, the late autumn sun dipping below the tree line, painting the sky in bruised purples and burnt oranges. "You're a menace to corporate structures, you know that?" Nora said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "I have my moments," Leo replied, a soft smile playing on his lips. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the shadows lengthen across the gravel. There was no contract between them, no promises of eternity, no forced proximity. Just 2 people standing on solid ground, slowly, carefully, learning how to grow. Leo reached out, his hand gently brushing against hers. His fingers were calloused now, rough with the memory of the soil. Nora didn't pull away. She turned her hand over, intertwining her fingers with his, anchoring him to the earth. If Nora's unapologetic strength and Leo's willing redemption resonated with you, you're not alone. True value isn't found in a bank account. It's built in the dirt, through respect, grit, and genuine connection. What would you have done in Nora's shoes? Would you take the money or keep your pride? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more deeply human, grounded storytelling.